Welcome to Next in Nonprofits. I'm Steve Boland, and I am very pleased to be joined today by my friend Andy Goldman-Gray. Andy is the co-founder of Nonprofit Strategy Group. Andy, thanks for taking the time to talk today.
Yeah, really excited to sit down with you today, Steve.
We had a chance to catch up over breakfast a little while ago and talk about some of the newer focuses of your work, about collaboration and creativity around that and this moment in time. And there's so much to get into. But before we dive into that, could you just introduce the Nonprofit Strategy Group? What type of work do you do there?
Sure. Nonprofit Strategy Group is a new collaboration between Mimi Larson and I. Mimi and I have worked together for 26 or so years in different capacities. Both approach our jobs in planning and advancement and communications and leadership with a really adaptive frame of mind. We've seen a lot of things in our careers. We were both part of the combinations of the St. Paul and Minneapolis United Ways. We worked at large organizations and small, and we know that mental flexibility and mental acuity is really critical to leaders that want to think and plan and do things differently, especially in times of complexity. So we work in adaptive strategic planning for organizations that are having some sort of transformational moment, and right now really feels ripe with that.
Yeah, like it or not, there are definitely transformative moments happening all over. One of the first things when we started talking about this before recording that came to my mind is people that may be coming to a table of collaboration, thinking that this is a forced moment and not something that they're doing by choice. Circumstances being what they are, maybe it's okay that those are the things that create the opportunity for a conversation, but it isn't necessarily that just difficult external times means everybody should figure out a new collaboration. How do you start thinking through whether this moment is bringing the right people to the table to talk about the right things?
Yeah, I think we think that right now is a time where there's a lot of competition
Hmm.
for scarce resources and a lot of complexity in the work that we're doing. Changing federal rules and state rules and county rules and city rules, donor expectations, funder expectations, really changing a lot. So we look at this idea of creative collaboration or creative combination as about upping your brain power and making sure that we've got the right people in the right rooms talking about the right opportunities at the right time. And there is a little feeling of it feels forced right now. And also maybe that's not so bad. Like external pressure leads to changes that might bring additional tailwinds behind our work. So we think that whether it feels forced or not, a leader right now should be looking at the opportunity in that complexity and an opportunity in that transformational moment.
Do you have that feeling though that some people are thinking, oh gosh, the words mergers or acquisitions or whatnot are out there, and that feels like somebody has to lose. So I don't want to begin this conversation because it somehow admits a failure. I assume that that is part of what people have to go through when they're considering what collaboration means. Is that true?
Yeah, I don't think we want to be involved in organizations and moments where there's going to be lose. There's an opportunity for transformation. There's an opportunity for evolution and adaptation. And I think leaders right now that are looking at this and leading from a place of fear and leading from a place of scarcity are the ones that often will feel like there's an opportunity to lose. And leaders and boards that come to this with an opportunity to look at it with abundance and a way to further our missions are the ones that are going to make the right kind of collaborations and the right kind of mission alignment so that their work can continue far into the future. That means people's jobs are going to change. Not everyone will be in the same seats that they were in. So there is an opportunity sort of for reckoning the difference between uh, mission advancement and collaborations that make a lot of sense for the communities and the clients that we serve, and separating that from individual organizational um, power or individual organizational spans of influence. So there is some opportunity for change, and some people are going to come out of that maybe different than they thought they were going to. But certainly, as we look at this as leaders of the sector, we have to think about what is going to keep the sector strongest and our ability to serve our missions most complete. So I think that when we look at boards and leaders of organizations that are thinking about how do we sustain our mission right now, collaborations is just one of the tools in the tool set that they need to be considering right now.
So I really appreciate you mentioning and focusing on the mission of the organization rather than necessarily the preservation of this existing structure of a, you know, legally constructed entity that has a 501(c)(3) status or whatever. That those may be aligned, but they're not exactly the same thing. I was just earlier today, we're recording this in October of 25, listening to the latest episode of a podcast called I Was Told There Would Be Snacks.
Hmm.
Which is a wonderful little thing that's put out by the Tennessee Nonprofit Association. And I really wish I would have thought of that name for a podcast a dozen years ago when I started this one. That's such a great way of approaching, like, aren't we having no oh shoot, not snacks. But they had a conversation about board members stepping up in this moment and all the rest of it, but with their primary responsibility being the preservation of the organization. And here's where I was kind of, talking into my podcasting app with nobody listening to me going, is that their mission? Is it to just preserve the organization? Or is it something else that maybe is also kind of preserving the organization? Do you ever run into people thinking from the board level or certainly ED level, my first responsibility is this legally constructed entity has to survive versus what's the mission that has to be accomplished here?
Yeah, and we're not just running into that. We've trained boards to think that way for
Uh, yeah.
generations, right? Fiduciary responsibility, responsibility to the staff, responsibility to making payday, to raising the right amount of money to meet our budget. We really train boards to think that way, and leaders will follow their boards, right? In that case. And one of the things that we are just hoping we can inculcate with this new partnership is that it's a time when boards and executive leaders need to turn outward. So it's less about mitigating risk inside, and it's more about exploring opportunity outside. That, with a shrinking pool of dollars, with donor rules changing, with funders becoming more selective about where they're giving, we're going to have organizations that either fail, which is just going to be a fact, I think, over the next 5 to 10 to 15 years, or we're going to have organizations that look outward and figure out a different way to accomplish the mission and the reason that they were founded.
So I appreciate that kind of reality check that even if there hadn't been such disruption to the nonprofit sector going on, probably organizations' life cycles adapt and change. Some of them don't continue on for all kinds of reasons. Sometimes it's just they didn't raise money and they needed to close the shop. But I do think that being more intentional about the conversations in community around what that life cycle looks like could help so many people in so many ways. Even if there's not a longer term collaboration that carries the mission forward, just that organization recognizing they may not be able to sustain operations and connecting with others to at least give them the heads up would be a step forward in a community collaboration, even if it doesn't mean something else. So I'm wondering how you think about the, one option is to stop operating the way that you've been operating, and maybe it just goes away completely. That's on the table. It's going to happen to somebody probably. How do you evaluate if that's the end of it versus there are other opportunities to collaborate or continue in different ways?
Yeah, I think you're a child of the 80s like I am, and you remember
Indeed.
choose your own adventure books.
Sure.
There are a whole range of options from we don't need to do anything. We think we have support and we're going to sort of lower our head and weather the storm.
Hmm.
I don't, I think that the situation and the environment is changing enough that that can maybe work for a year or two, but I think we're in for really a generational reset on the environment and the sector of nonprofit right now. But there's, 5 or 6 doors that you can walk through before you get to merger or sunsetting an organization. And I think that what we're encouraging is boards and leaders to look at what those doors are that an organization might walk through. And it might be program collaborations, it might be back office consolidation, it might be merger, it might be sunsetting, but there are a lot of options that boards have to look through right now. And it's really hard to do that if the choice you make is we're just going to lower our head and try and hunker down and weather the storm. That part of the idea of adaptive strategic planning is laying out those decision points and those choices that you have long before you have to open that door and walk through it. So I think that the message to leaders right now is you better be exploring what those doors are. And it's really hard to do that if you're just talking internally. So the opportunities for sector collaboration. So we're seeing housing groups get together and talk about how they operate different. We're looking at interesting creative group fundraising efforts in civic organizations. So there's a lot of opportunities for creative collaborations that are sort of outside the either we're going to stay exactly the same or we're going to merge or we're going to close binary.
So let's pretend, for the sake of argument, in this spectrum that you were just talking about, that you get approached at Nonprofit Strategies Group by an organization that has some cash in the bank, that has projected stable funding, that might be able to tell themselves, I don't have to do this right now. But this particular group has got a little bit more forward-thinking leadership, and they're like, okay, we have some time. How do we start evaluating what partnerships, collaborations might be good while we're relatively healthy, versus, we have 6 months and we, have to make some choices because we know this other funding stream is going to go away or whatever. Let's talk first about that. I have time. How do I begin if I'm in a good strategic place?
Yeah, so two things about that. The first is that almost no one in the sector that we work in delivers delivers on their mission and their services independent of other factors.
Hmm.
So you may be healthy right now, but the two organizations that refer to you or that you refer to might not be. So we don't have the luxury right now of looking at just what's my only what my position is, but we have to look at what's best for the sector. And so I think leaders that are forward looking enough to say, where do I start, should look at what the environment they're working in, either geographic or by sector. So mapping out where there are strengths in that sector, where there are places maybe where there's a little bit more stress that are going to impact the clients that you're serving or the community that you're serving. So having a really good sense of what's happening in your corner of the mission delivery, and how it's impacted by others. So you can't have a really solid strategy without understanding where the other parts of that puzzle are. And so really good forward-looking leaders right now are thinking about, where am I getting my clients, or where am I sending my clients, or what are the things that are impacting me, either from a funding perspective or from a mission and service delivery perspective. And the second is, how positioned is my team and my board to be able to make change when we need to? So the second part is looking inward, at where their strengths are. So uh, are they building a mindset of collaboration in their organization? Are they investing in relationship building across that sector that they've identified? Are they defining success in a way that sets them up for accomplishment of their mission and their ability to raise future dollars? And then how are they building that resilience that they need internally so that when these things when the headwinds start to hit them, they can turn it around and make it into a tailwind. So first is understanding what the sector is. The second is understanding what their internal strengths are, and then the third is engaging the communities that support them in expanding the way that they accomplish their mission. And that might be foundations and funders, it might be public sector dollars, or it might be individual donors who are all looking at 100 different requests right now by organizations that are stressed or are worried about being stressed, and staking out that position so that you have future dollars that are coming to you.
So, as you talk about that, taking a look around at the environment that you're operating in, your particular niche that has partners in some way, shape, or forms out there. It may be more formal, it may be less formal, but there's going to be things that impact your work. I guess I would poke at the idea a little bit of, maybe we don't assume that everything is as it looks from the outside. You and I have been working in Minnesota for some decades, and while we do work with organizations outside the state, we've certainly seen some pretty big and, to me, unexpected organizational, well, collapses, for lack of a better word, in the last few years here, where everybody else is like, wait a minute, what happened? They were okay 4 months ago, everything seemed okay, and all of a sudden, no payroll. Uh,
Yeah.
we can't necessarily assume that the infrastructure around us is as it appears from the outside. I think part of this has to be probing, what's really happening with those partners that they maybe don't broadcast on the front page of the website, but that's going to mean some trusted conversations.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of collaborative tables in this town and in the state, people that come together around their sectors. And I think right now, when the propensity is to hunker down and to be in your office, worrying and thinking and creating plans for a whole bunch of different scenarios, maybe right now boards and executive leaders would have time better spent out in that community. So I think you're right,
Yeah.
Steve, which is um, lowering our heads isn't an option right now. We don't get to be ostriches in the sand. Part of
Right.
it is building that ability to be resilient and adaptive internally, but a big part of it is making sure that we're out there loudly crowing about our organization's mission and our place in it, and understanding, like you said, where others are in that same space, especially as it impacts the work that we do. I'm just seeing a lot of energy when I go to conferences or where I go to those collaborative tables. But I do worry a little bit about whether or not we're seeing people's full vulnerable selves in that.
Yes, that vulnerability is an important part of it. So that may require some trust that as you're having some initial conversations, people believe you and you say, won't leave this room, but I just want to talk about how things are going. Because in that spectrum that I just mentioned at the beginning, there's this great healthy organization where they really need to understand what their opportunities are, but they're okay right now. And then there is that I've got 4 to 6 months organization out there that, maybe some big miracle is going to happen, but maybe not. And they could be in a lot more of a pressure point, and they maybe don't come to you first. Maybe you have to go to them, and then you get that opportunity for them to say, yeah, things are tough, and we really do have to think about things differently from how we've been doing them. But if that organization comes to you first and said, all right, we waited a little longer than we should have, you know, we're not real sure. We've got a relatively short window here where things get very uncertain. How does that change your perspective with them on collaborations and being more creative?
Well, I think that whether you've got a 5-year runway or a 25-year runway or a 5-month runway, understanding what those points of adaptation are is going to be really important. So what are those? What are the options that an organization has at that time? So it might be more constricted if you only have 4 months of operating cash.
Hmm.
You might have to make some quicker decisions. You might have less of a menu to choose from. But it is about understanding what the options are and then helping them and their boards explore what the best option for them and their mission is at that moment. And a big part of that is, are there others in the sector or in the community that they serve that are likely and ripe for a combination or collaboration? And
Hmm.
so one of the things that we do is just understand enough about the organizations around to be able to do a little bit of matchmaking. And where we don't have those places, we've got a big network of folks that work in that. And think about where are conversations that we can initiate so that that organization isn't feeling all alone sitting in their office worrying and having to make hard choices about staff without seeing that full range of options. So I would say, as much as you can, get out and explore the opportunities you have for either mission extension through collaboration or figuring out where you might sunset programs and hand them over to other organizations that might be better positioned. But looking at those full range of options and understanding them and then getting your board rallied around them is going to be really important for those organizations.
So, as you talk about getting a few of those folks together, let's say there's two or three that are in some kind of chain together or know something about each other. There's a range of formal options that they could consider, but there's also some pretty informal pieces that may involve like collaborative fundraising you mentioned, which I think is a really intriguing space right now. Where do you go in evaluating like the strengths of partners or the opportunities to create a collaboration for the first time?
Yeah, I think trust building is really critical in that step. So either executive leadership or board leadership, or probably both,
Hmm.
getting together and understanding what the common goals are for a creative combination. So that has to start there. Building that trust, understanding each other's positions really clearly. So we're not doing the Minnesota skim over where we don't really share the bad news and we only share the good news. Um, and then charting where those potential collaborations might be, whether it's a common funding, common program management, back-end consolidation. There's a lot of different options that those organizations have, but it really starts with understanding your position relative to those organizations that you want to collaborate with, and then building the trust and knowledge of those boards and executive leaders to walk that path together. And that's the part that takes the most time and the most emotional and intellectual energy to get to that point. Once you sort of decide what you want to do, then it becomes an operational exercise.
Hmm.
But getting to that decision point is the hard work, and that's the heavy lifting. And that's where often people, if they try and manage it themselves, they get stuck because they're always thinking about their, uh, what's in their best interest and not necessarily in the other collaborative entity's interest. So having a third party help guide that work is really important. And then the other thing that I'd say is um, I have lots of thoughts about foundations and funders and where they're
Hmm.
at right now. One of the things that they're doing that I think is really laudable is that they're making planning dollars available for organizations that are thinking about this full range of options, collaborations, partnerships, sunsetting, whatever the options are. Our foundation partners are providing resources to help us work through that in, I think, a relatively short time frame.
Are you seeing those as specific calls, or you just need to initiate that conversation with some program officers over there, where they're like, "Yeah, this maybe isn't on the regular menu, but
Yeah.
we're having these conversations with these two or three partners, and it is going to take a lot of staff time and board energy and all the rest of it, and that's going to impact our ability to do the regular job. We'll need some extra support during that time." They might be willing to have a conversation, even if it isn't something that's normally on the regular offing.
Yeah, some have formal programs for it. St. Paul, Minnesota has a planning fund that you can tap into. And others, if you've got a trusted program officer, actually have a lot of energy and excitement about organizations that are thinking about different ways to achieve mission right now. So certainly um, these moments in time when your organization either has a big opportunity that they're trying to leverage or a big threat that they're trying to mitigate, our funding partners, and that's individual as well as institutional, are really interested in hearing from us in these moments and us being transparent about where we as an organization are. I think it's in our best interest for our funders and our donors to understand the general position that we find ourselves in so that they can either put their support behind it or maybe bring different kind of resources to bear.
Yeah. So walk me through if it does, somebody comes to the table, maybe with just this, very old-fashioned problem that isn't necessarily about 2025ism, which is a whole nother thing, but a 30-year founded organization doesn't really have the oomph or the energy to transition to new leadership when that founder is finally ready to go away. Maybe that's just the thing, and they didn't plan and they don't need to. That can be one ending, but the mission work maybe has some energy to go somewhere. That could be connected to something else. If it's that simple, one organization sunsets. Does the other organization just assume everything? Does it, how do they negotiate that transition if there is going to be a more formal legal kind of change in community?
I'm still getting over the can we put aside the 2025ism because it feels so pivotal to me right now.
Right.
What's happening? Okay, so I'm trying to put that
But there
away for a
were
second. Yeah,
collaborative
yeah,
cooperation
there
things
were for
happening
sure.
before, and
We've
hopefully there
been
will
part of
be
them.
after.
We've seen them. Okay, so tell me the question again, Steve. Sorry, I got stuck in the
Well,
the
just the
oh,
example of, one of the reasons that some organizations close eventually is
right.
they don't have missions that really succeed past their initial founders. And, that getting past that first transition can be really difficult for some organizations to do. Some of them just don't make it past that they never really had the ability to continue without that charismatic, connected leader, whatever. But that doesn't mean that their work wasn't important and that there isn't something to carry forward. It means that particular organizational structure probably doesn't survive. But how does it get absorbed into something with a different legal structure? How do they connect that if it's a different name? Does that become part of the problem?
Yeah, I think looking at where the energy comes from in an organization is really especially an organization that, is maybe $1 million to $5 million in revenue. They've got, a healthy stable of 500-ish donors, a couple of big grants, maybe. Looking at where the energy is coming from for that mission advancement is really a critical part in that step, I think, or critical step in that. Is it all founder? In which case it probably is. sunset, maybe take a couple of programs and move them over to another organization. If it's coming from the donor base, then
Mm.
whoever is in charge post founder has to understand where the goals of that donor base are. Do they believe in that mission deeply? Then it's probably worth salvaging that mission and moving it to another organization in some way, shape, or form. If it's coming from the board gets to turn inward at that point, and
Mm.
determine where they want to go with that mission next. So it's a really interesting use case, and founder syndrome has been well studied by scholars and sector leaders in ways that I don't look at so much. But I think that the idea of a board and a team understanding what its options are and being really clear-eyed about it is the best place to start in any kind of transformational moment. And that's honesty with yourself about your health, honesty with yourself about what your goals for the future are, and then honesty with yourself about your organizational capacity to pull those things off. So in that case, it's such an interesting scenario. And it seems to me understanding where the energy, where the heartbeat of that organization is coming from is going to really guide you where you go with it next.
Because you mentioned at the very beginning of our conversation that you were working for what was in the United Way of Greater St. Paul area or St. Paul area
Right.
United Way, whatever the name of it was before. And there was a similarly named West Metro United Way. And when the two of those organizations decided to come together, they picked a different name. They didn't just become, the Minneapolis United Way that also serves St. Paul. It became
Yeah.
Greater Twin Cities. Does whatever structure require the community to see something new? Are there times when it makes more sense to keep a brand identity that is going to be harder for one constituency to adapt to than another, but there's reasons that makes sense to do? I've not really been part of that kind of a conversation.
Yeah. In that case, the energy for that merger came from its supporters
Hmm.
who had been supporting two almost identical missions in what was becoming a more and more interlaced economy.
Yeah.
So more employers had employees both in St. Paul and Minneapolis. The places where funding was going from those two United Ways, there was like 60% overlap. And everyone got together and said the only thing keeping these things apart are an outdated regional mentality, or sorry, parochial mentality in
Mm.
an evolving regional economy. And so it was really clear where we need to go with that, and it made sense for that to be the name became Greater Twin Cities United Way. I think we're seeing that. We saw that with YMCA's on the north.
Mm.
You know, so there's a lot of organizations that have, as they've grown their mission, because organizations have come together, have rebranded. I think that makes a lot of sense in probably most cases.
Okay.
And we've also seen that go wrong where organizations merge or come together and then they pick, I call it an internet name, like you put it into a system and say, what can I trademark? What's an available URL? And it's
Right.
some, synergistic name with an X. It ends with an X always, where there's no connection to the heart, no connection to the founding, no connection to the way the donors supported it. I think in that case, maybe either they didn't do their brand work right or they lost the thread. And I think what's really fascinating about all those decisions is it takes a board and a team of staff who are able to put aside their own egos around the mission and say what's best for this new collaboration or this new organization. And in the case of the United Ways, that worked really well because the board
Hmm.
leadership in those cases was very strong. There were two executives who had a real plan about how they wanted to work together. And the staffs came around that eventually. And in cases where it's not that way, where the boards aren't quite as well aligned, where maybe there's competition in the executives that are going to be filling the seats after that organization or that entity is in new combination, that's where you see a little bit more of the fumbles or the dropped opportunities.
It's really interesting to think about, but I love we just came up with 2025ism or 2025ness of and we have to trademark those web names. I'm sure there's an opportunity out there to do something. But you don't want to necessarily create a new organizational thing that feels very connected to a passing fad or a transit moment in time or whatever it needs to be, that mission connection. But people will adapt to a new identity or a new name or a new whatever. You mentioned earlier, though, that some of these shifts in how creative collaborations come about might come from a funding base rather than the staff and the boards and the folks that are potentially coming together. Are there organizations that are more intentionally kind of connecting with their donors, both larger individuals or maybe institutional givers, and asking this question specifically about who do you think we should be collaborating with? What do you see as collaboration opportunities? Because I don't see that question asked very often, and now that I'm hearing you raise it, I'm like, why aren't we asking that question?
Yeah, what I'm seeing more is funders pulling together rooms of people who have like missions and overlapping either geographies, and then building relationships in that way so that those conversations can happen naturally. I think the sector would rankle if funders would say it's time to merge.
Yeah,
But making resources available for organizations that are under stress, or are just looking for new ways to operate, that'll just naturally encourage that kind of collaboration. So I don't think nonprofit leadership, either board or executive leadership, would cotton too much to a funder saying you should talk to those three organizations because you're doing the exact same thing. But what we are good at is getting together and talking about the things that we do that are special or unique to our organizations. And
yeah.
that's always the opportunity to see, is there a patchwork there that we can start to build a bigger quilt with? So the question's an interesting one. Should it happen? Maybe.
Well, I mean,
I
should
think
it be initiated from the individual organizations as they currently stand? I mean, should they go to their funders and say, and again, this could be some individuals, not just institutional partners. Certainly there are foundations and kind of larger institutional funders that may have thoughts from their own seeing many applications. But this idea you raise of could some of that come from donors if we ever bothered to ask them? Because I don't see, we do ask donors for information about our mission work and whatnot, but I don't know that I see a lot of charities reaching out and saying, who do you think we should be connecting with more on the impacts that we're having? What other things do you like to support that you think we should be knowing about? And I think that's a really intriguing way to discover opportunity.
I think you're right. Boy, that would require us to act in different ways in our relationship with our funders and
Yeah,
our donors. It would give some power over that. I know organizations are a little scared about because there's already so much power imbalance between funder and
mm,
grantee or funder and donee. Um, but it is an interesting one. What I'm encouraging more and more is don't wait for them to tell you. Get together with your peers and figure out if there's some sort of collaboration that you can, a fundraising collaboration that you can engage in.
yeah,
So can you go and make a case for transformational funding from donors and institutional funders if you look a little different? And that difference might be like 10 organizations in Rondo that are serving the same community with different parts of the mission, but everyone is feeling a little underfed right now. And can you go with a larger vision for maybe like what a Rondo collaboration or Northeast Minneapolis collaboration or whatever the case might be?
sure.
Or is it 10 hunger relief organizations that are all nibbling at the same apple, but if you went with a combined look at the sector, maybe you could take the whole apple all at once.
So I know that there have been other times, the 2008 recession, the first Trump presidency, where they're like, oh, we're going to lose people. We're going to lose organizations here. Some of them happened, right? But I don't know that it happened to the degree that we feared. Are we thinking that maybe they are going to survive better because there's this opportunity to collaborate that might do some more mission stuff, or is it just inevitable we're probably going to lose some?
Well, I think that gets to how much of the 2025-ishness you're worried about.
Yeah,
And what Mimi and I think is that we're sort of at a generational change in the way that nonprofits and the government work together. And that's such a big funder of nonprofits. So we think it's going to be generational. We've also got big generational wealth transfer. We've got the growth of DAFs and money
yeah,
sitting park not supporting missions. We've got all these, and we got, not to mention AI. and technology and how that's disrupting the way that we do business. There are so many big transformational things that I think the 2025-ishness of it means for us at Nonprofit Strategy Group that this is going to be something where the echoes are 10 years from now and 15 years from now. So I think this year we're going to have record individual fundraising. The Texas Giving Day just happened. They were up $6 million. I would expect that our Give to the Max Day here is going to be up high. People want to respond to individual needs of organizations that they care deeply about. So yes, you should be taking advantage of that right now by telling stories about the way that you and your clients or the communities you've served are feeling stressed by this. And at the same time, we think that this is going to have a really long shadow. So, you know, it might not be this year and it might not be next year, but we think 3 or 4 or 5 years from now, there's going to be consolidation because of this renegotiation between government and nonprofit about the way services are delivered and economic stress because of all the other things that are happening, hitting people's discretionary income, meaning long-term fundraising prospects probably are a little bit, I think they're a little bit bleak.
Yeah. So if people get together and start thinking about those opportunities to collaborate, but the idea of a specific program delivery or whatever, it just seems like there's a lot to work through. As you said, the emotional labor of it all has got to happen in addition to, which is things. You mentioned some starting points that could be really interesting in terms of just, sharing some back office expenses, looking at shared database systems or something along those lines. Are those easier first steps, or are they really the last ones that come in after something more formal has been negotiated?
No, those are great places to start, we think. And that can happen. I mean, there has to be agreement that organizations want to work together in that way because it still takes a lot of trust to work on those things. But it's also ways that we're used to working within organizations, sharing program strengths, sharing database strengths, those kind of things. So we know how to do that work. So that is often a good first step. It's dating before you get married, right? And the ways that we date in the nonprofit sector are in program and service delivery and back office primarily. But it could also mean co-location. I mean, there's a way to save expense if you need to, especially if you've got a smaller staff than you did 3 years ago, or you do more mutual delivery of services. So those are all good ways. And then the other thing is advancement in fundraising, shared services. So, Steve, you do this work on a daily basis, working with organizations to help their advancement teams. There are ways to collaborate in that work that I think could end up saving organizations time and money. So we're all sharing, we're all buying databases, and we're all doing direct mail or whatever our version of that is. The other way to collaborate could be around interesting advancement and fundraising programs.
Yeah, one of the organizations that I'm doing some direct support for is doing a collaborative campaign over Give to the Max Day here in Minnesota. Our big statewide giving day is coming up in November. And going to a, sometimes competitive feeling day and feeling like, oh, goodness gracious, how am I going to get attention with literally thousands of other nonprofits trying to raise the flag at the same time? That collaboration in that fund development thing is a little bit more of a unique eye catch to that donor going, oh, these two organizations I like are doing one campaign together, and I can, contribute to that and kind of feel like I'm hitting two buckets at the same time and learning more about each one. Those organizations have, they're by no means, they're not married. They're not really even dating all that seriously, but it is, an opportunity to very easily test how does that donor respond when we link arms with another organization and say, we want you to give one time on this Give to the Max Day, but that one pool will benefit both of us. I think that thinking really is refreshing to a lot of donors to hear that kind of thing. And it introduces both parties to, organizational supporters that they maybe hadn't met yet.
It's like a give to the max and chill.
We are really torturing this metaphor.
We are. Yeah. Well, yeah. Yes. Sorry. So there are. When you look back at the history of GiveMN, and I'm proud to be part of the organization and that started that. This was meant to be a day where all boats rise because we're telling impressive stories about the work nonprofits in Minnesota are doing. So I think that that's exactly right, and I love that. So whatever the metaphor is, putting your toe into this world of creative collaborations is we think, a good idea because it's going to set the stage, if you need to move further down that path. Um, and I want to be careful. I don't want to be the Grim Reaper. I don't want to be the guy you call when everything's sunk. Mimi and I are both actually eternal optimists and really hopeful about the sector. And what we want to do is make sure that organizations are thinking about what the doors that they can walk through at the right time are. So there are going to be organizations that succeed and grow and are really well positioned to handle the things and address the things that this community is going to need for the next 50 and 100 years. And those are going to be the organizations that are thinking now about what the adaptations they might need to make are. So I just don't want this to come through as like everything's going to hell in a handbasket and just give up work. This is about putting you and your organization in a position to deliver on your mission in the best way you possibly can in times that are really complex.
Right. I do think that, and we are running a little low on time, and I want to kind of make sure that you have a moment to bring up anything we haven't had a chance to get to yet before we have to close. But a long time before the 2025ism became what it is, there's been that phrase of chaos and opportunity being the two sides to the coin. That even before now, if there was major disruption, one way to respond to major disruption is, well, what opportunity does this present that I wasn't thinking of before because I was along the way. And I do think that we don't want to be doomsayers about the fact that there's a lot of chaos. There's a lot of disruption that is absolutely happening. Nobody should pretend that it's not. But how we respond to it can be a little bit of where is the opportunity in this rather than feeling like there is no opportunity and it's only going to be downside. So yes, let's lift that up, that this moment, just like other moments of chaos, it brings an opportunity for us to think differently. But what other things should we be leaving folks with, Andy, before we have to get ready to close today?
Yeah, I just think if you're an executive director or executive staff in a nonprofit or a board member that happens to be listening to this, now's the time to look outward. This is a mantra that Mimi and I have with our clients that we work with, which is turn outward. Now's not the time to hunker down and pretend like you can just budget cut your way through whatever is going to be happening over the next few years. Look outward at the opportunity, look outward at the possibility, and look out for your peers. We are in a sector where there's a lot of us that are going through the same worry, the same planning. So make sure that we're spending time with each other, supporting each other, and looking for the opportunity for all boats to rise during this chaos.
Yeah.
So I think that message of don't just risk mitigate, don't just stay inside, but get out and turn your gaze outward.
Yeah, we've talked a lot on this podcast with other guests too, that abundance mentality that begins this conversation, that the opportunities were like, well, yeah, this would be a good thing to do, but it's going to take money, time, energy, whatever. I'm like, okay, yes, it will.
It will.
And there probably is ways to find the money. There are ways to plan the time, all of those things, and we just have to get ready to hunker down. This other podcast I was talking about, I'll just link it in the show notes. They were talking about risk management and that some boards are feeling like risk is a danger. And the encouragement that they were trying to bring to boards was, what's the downside, right? Because you can probably fix the downside. If something doesn't work with it, then maybe some time was not well utilized. It didn't end up making the change you wanted, but now you know something about this that you didn't know before. So that downside is not, oh my heavens, we have to avoid it at all costs, but rather how do we manage the downside if there's going to be one? Because, that's what risk is.
And our ability to adapt in those moments has to be built long before we get to that moment where it's either going to work or not. The other thing that I'd leave the listeners with is that your funders are thinking about these too. And so make sure that you're not having this conversation alone, that you're engaging your donors and your funders in the conversation as well. They have resources to bring bear. They have often insider information that you might not be privy to if you're just sitting in your office thinking about and worrying about this alone. So engage the funders.
a really sound pace to close on is those people are resources beyond just their ability to make a financial contribution, that
Right.
they may know things that if asked, they would be willing to share. So I really appreciate that. Andy Goldman-Gray is the co-founder of Nonprofit Strategy Group. Andy, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thanks, Steve.